Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is swift, comprehensive, and I think really essential. We are slicing through the complex political and economic currents of Latin America.
And we need to.
We do. And we're not doing this with generic headlines. We are doing a deep analysis curated specifically by the international observer Tenenbaum. We have a mountain of notes, research, and geopolitical observation here, focused entirely on, the shifting reality south of the border.
And this curated deep dive is so necessary because the region is shifting so rapidly, but the causes of that shift are deeply complex and often misunderstood by outside observers.
Right.
What Tenenbaum gives us is a critical framework for understanding whether the political turbulence we're seeing, that famous swing between left and right, the so-called pendulum, whether that's just a normal, healthy political correction that we expect in democratic cycles, or
something worse.
Or if it's signaling a deeper, more vicious structural cycle that is, stalling the region's economic and social development. It's far more complicated than simply labeling countries red or blue.
Absolutely. And to show just how different the internal and external views are and why this deep dive focused on Tenenbaum's regional analysis is so crucial, we have to start with a surprising detail. It's what the United States is currently focused on versus what the global geopolitical observers are actually watching. According to Tenenbaum, the big domestic stories capturing the American imagination right now are pretty sensational, but they're totally overwhelmingly inward focused.
That's right. When Tenenbaum was observing the U.S. environment, he noted the dominant news cycle was focused on two very localized phenomena. One was the shocking, really tragic crime story of the Portuguese killer.
Right, I remember this.
The individual who murdered a nuclear physicist at MIT and then two Brown University students before committing suicide. The sheer sensationalism of it and, the proximity to these highly regarded educational institutions meant that this specific localized crime story just dominated the conversation. It received immense airtime and column inches.
And you juxtapose that high drama crime with the other major domestic focus he observed, the perceived legalization of marijuana by Trump.
Yeah.
Tenenbaum characterized the actual policy development as being about, three-quarters true?
Something like that.
Meaning there were significant steps, but it wasn't a full national overhaul. But the perception among the public was that this massive national regulatory and policy shift was happening. And these two poles, high drama local crime and highly personalized domestic policy shifts, they really illustrate the narrow band of focus that captures the American news diet.
Yep.
It often completely eclipses global concerns.
It profoundly speaks to the American bubble. It really does. Tenenbaum notes the overwhelming majority of Americans live inwardly. They're just deeply absorbed in domestic issues, whether it's cultural wars, local security, or economic policy that directly impacts their state or their neighborhood.
And there's a stat that backs this up, right?
There is. A truly stunning, decades-long statistic that underpins this inward focus. Historically, only about 13% of Americans have ever traveled outside the country.
13%. That's incredibly low.
It's unbelievably low. And while that figure might have nudged up slightly, maybe to 17% recently due to global economic shifts and cheaper travel, it remains incredibly low compared to most developed nations. This reflects a fundamental insulation from global realities.
That lack of external perspective, it has to translate directly into a profound lack of interest in global affairs. We're talking about massive ongoing conflicts like Gaza, which, outside of activist groups and specific campuses, barely registers for the American on the street. Or you can consider major regional events that directly affect U.S. security and trade, like the constant low-level threat of Trump suggesting an invasion of Venezuela. For the average American, the one who is always driving and not on foot and globally aware, as Tenenbaum humorously put it, these complex, persistent issues just barely register.
Yeah, the general feeling is that if it's not being discussed on morning television or affecting their gas prices, it's not important. It's just background noise.
And this distinction between citizen interest and government interest is absolutely key for you, the learner, to grasp.
It is.
Because within the halls of power, yes, you absolutely have figures, particularly on the right, like Marco Rubio, who demonstrate a specific and sustained interest in Latin American policy.
Sure, they're often viewing it through the lens of security, drug trade, or containing socialism.
Exactly. But for the general populace?
Nothing. Tenenbaum observed they simply do not care. The level of ignorance is surprisingly high. Many, apparently, don't even know where Venezuela is located, let alone the complexities of the current government or the ongoing economic blockade efforts. This lack of public scrutiny gives U.S. foreign policy immense freedom and allows complex regional shifts to happen without a broad American public response.
So if the U.S. public is looking inward, and the American citizen couldn't care less about these complex geopolitical movements south of the border, it means the regional dynamics are not being dictated by a hyper-vigilant U.S. public, but rather by intense internal pressures
The burden falls entirely on the region itself.
to determine its own trajectory, free from intense external public interference. And that brings us to the core of this deep dive. We need to analyze whether the dramatic political shifts are a natural correction or a sign of deeper structural failure.
The central question Tenenbaum poses is vital. Is the dramatic left-to-right shift we are currently observing across Latin America a normal political pendulum that corrects itself over time? Historically, it moved between, a center-right and a center-left, maintaining some continuity of institutions,
A healthy swing.
a healthy swing. Or is this current volatility evidence of a deeper, more vicious structural cycle that might be stalling the region's overall development, where the pendulum swings wildly toward extremes, left or right, only to inevitably crash and swing back just as violently?
Historically, our observer noted it was a pendulum, predictable in its general arc.
It was.
But Tenenbaum suggests there are two massive novel factors challenging that historical pendulosity, potentially disrupting the classic swing mechanism entirely. And these factors are global in scope and change the calculus for every local politician.
The first factor is the obvious one, external geopolitical influence. The degree of change in Latin America and whether the pendulum continues depends entirely on who is offering the most attractive alternative to the existing system.
And it's not just the U.S. anymore.
Not by a long shot. The U.S. remains primarily focused on security and containment. But now it's about the massive, persistent influence of rising trade and infrastructure investment from China, which often comes with few political strings attached compared to Western aid.
Which is very attractive.
Very. And then you have the continued security and arms dealings from Russia, which supports regimes like Venezuela. Europe is also a player, providing both trade and diplomatic pressure. If these external powers present radically different options for finance, trade, and governance, it fundamentally changes the political calculation for local leaders. It makes that historical, locally driven pendulum almost irrelevant.
And the second factor, which Tenenbaum calls arguably the most important because it's a fundamental technological shift.
Artificial intelligence.
Exactly, AI. And this is where we need to move beyond abstraction.
We do.
AI is reorganizing not just work globally, but the entire geopolitical structure. We're talking about very real, immediate consequences in Latin America. First, it affects job markets, right? AI-driven automation could destroy the commodity export labor base in countries reliant on mining, agriculture, or manufacturing assembly.
That would force a massive and immediate political reckoning over unemployment and social welfare, a huge one.
And second, it affects politics itself. AI profoundly impacts how information is consumed, how political campaigns are run using micro-targeting, and critically, how deepfakes are used to create the famous rift, the grieta.
Exactly. AI is already eroding trust in institutions and creating these highly segmented groups. This technological revolution could significantly impact the region's political structures by fueling populism and radicalism on both ends of the spectrum. It could potentially halt or completely change the direction of the historical pendulum away from that classic moderate left-right axis.
I mean, if voters cannot trust what they see or hear, and if their livelihoods are threatened by automation, the stability required for a gentle pendular swing simply disappears.
It evaporates.
So here's where it gets really interesting. Despite those massive structural and technological challenges that are looming, the current evidence points toward a clear, rapid rightward trend across the continent. It's moving us away from the pink tide of, 2 decades ago?
Yeah, at least.
Let's do a quick roll call of recent conservative victories and stability to illustrate the current tilt, using Tenenbaum's observations.
Okay, let's start with Chile. We see a really defined shift there. A right conservative government is about to assume power, indicating a significant swing back from the previous progressive administration.
And they're focused on what?
Heavily on fiscal conservatism and security. It's a direct response to perceived overspending and rise in crime under the previous government.
Okay, what about Bolivia?
Bolivia is a less publicized but important shift.
Yeah.
The most conservative candidate secured victory over the liberal option, again tilting the balance toward traditional economic management and, Stability.
And Peru,
Ow.
our perennial paradox.
Telltale's the paradox, exactly. It's maintained a long-standing, essentially conservative base, which is an impressive feat considering the sheer political turmoil there.
I mean, they're constantly jailing their president.
Constantly. But the underlying economic and political structure remains conservative. Then you have Ecuador, which recently elected Novoa.
He's clearly defined as a conservative right-wing figure.
Very much so. It signals a strong move away from the more socialistic leanings of previous decades. His platform was almost entirely about economic liberalization and, crucially, fighting organized crime.
That crime element seems to be a common thread.
It's everywhere. Then there is Paraguay, which Tenenbaum describes as having one of the most conservative governments in the region. And crucially, it's a conservative government that is currently experiencing strong economic success, which is a critical point of comparison for other nations considering a rightward shift.
They become the model, in a way.
They do. And of course, Argentina with Javier Milei, he's politically complex, sometimes defined as libertarian, sometimes hard-right, but he's generally viewed within this overarching shift away from traditional left-wing Peronism.
And his mandate is radical.
It's primarily focused on radical economic contraction and dismantling the state bureaucracy.
We also have other conservative anchors holding steady across Central America and the Caribbean, which reinforces the overall trend.
Right. Panama is managed by a right-wing party. The Dominican Republic has stable right-wing management, and Guatemala is currently operating under a center-right government. The landscape is decidedly leaning right in terms of governing ideology and economic policy choices.
Okay, so let's look at the other side. The remaining governments that are either left-leaning or outright dictatorial. Where do they stand?
Well, Uruguay saw the left win, but they are often described as moderate. Though Tenenbaum expressed some skepticism about just how moderate they'll remain, given the recent economic issues and rising social aid dependency we'll discuss later.
Brazil is particularly interesting. Lula is the president and is clearly left-wing.
No question.
However, the crucial factor is that the parliamentary majority is center-right.
And that changes everything.
It does. This structure forces Lula into a position of moderation and constant compromise, a key difference from other strong left-wing leaders of the past. It prevents any radical, sudden ideological shift.
Mexico is currently managed by the left, but its foreign policy signals a real independence. The president recently made a highly visible international declaration that the UN, not the U.S., should dictate policy on Venezuela.
Which is a clear signal of regional independence and opposition to U.S. interventionism, even within a left-wing government. It shows a commitment to non-alignment.
Absolutely. And finally, you have the outright dictatorships. Venezuela and Cuba. The situation in Venezuela, for instance, has external ties that extend far beyond the region. Tenenbaum brought up the current scandal involving the Caribbean island of St. Vincent.
Right. What was that about?
This island was reportedly used by Chavez's allies to obscure and hide financial ties with the Spanish left, and it has now blown up into a major corruption scandal in Spain.
Wow.
It just demonstrates how interconnected these regimes are with European politics and corruption networks that span the Atlantic.
Okay, so we see this rapid synchronized swing to the right across the continent.
Right.
It's easy for an outside observer to assume a simple domino effect.
Right, that voters in one country are imitating the successful change in the next.
But Tenenbaum brought in a fundamental philosophical concept to challenge this, which is crucial for you, the learner, the Hume principle.
Yes. Let's dig into that point. David Hume's maxim is simple. Correlation is not causation.
The fact that two political phenomena occur at the same time does not mean one caused the other or that they share the same root cause.
Precisely.
Why is this so crucial in Latin American politics in particular?
Because it forces rigorous analysis. It stops you from taking the easy path. Tenenbaum applies this directly, dismissing the easy assumption that shifts occur simultaneously because they are caused by each other. He insists that Chilean voters were not influenced by Milei's success in Argentina simply because they are neighbors. Voters act individually based on their immediate reality.
So for you, the learner, this means when you analyze regional trends, you have to look for shared systemic drivers like corruption or poor economic performance,
Exactly.
rather than simply assuming one populist leader is influencing another.
That's the key.
So if it's not a regional domino effect, what are the primary drivers of political change that cause the pendulum to swing so violently? Tenenbaum suggests two massive forces often push the pendulum, sometimes to the left and sometimes violently to the right, depending on which side is currently perceived as the villain.
First, corruption. This has historically been a massive catalytic driver, often pushing the populace toward the left in search of fundamental revolutionary reform.
Like Chavez in Venezuela.
The most famous example. He won because of the deeply corrupt previous governments that had robbed the country blind for decades. And in Argentina, the historical issues associated with the political culture of Peronism, known for its combination of immense social spending, powerful labor unions, and periodic massive corruption. That contributed heavily to the public desire for radical change we saw recently. Corruption, Tenenbaum noted, creates the vacuum that populist extremes rush to fill.
And second, of course, economic conditions.
Yeah.
This is the immediate, visceral pain point.
Always. When the economy suffers, when people are watching their savings vanish through inflation, when unemployment is rising, and when traditional solutions aren't working, they often seek solutions of the left, demanding greater state intervention, social aid, and wealth redistribution.
And conversely, the pendulum swings violently to the right when the incumbent left fails to manage the economy effectively or becomes associated with high crime rates. The economy is always the ultimate referee.
But the real key, Tenenbaum stresses, is understanding voter behavior, which is always viewed through a purely local lens. People are generally not married to abstract ideology. They are intensely practical.
They vote based on their own immediate well-being.
Their own well-being, their children's future, and, crucially, the perceived well-being of their neighbors. It's a highly personal, survival-based, and often emotional calculation, not a philosophical one about political theory.
Furthermore, most people engage in what we could call voter habit.
That's a good way to put it.
They vote automatically, following the trends of their family, their friends, their immediate social circle, not necessarily because they have conducted a deep analysis of policy.
And Tenenbaum noted that the influence of traditional media on election outcomes is dubious and fading.
But social media.
Social media plays a massive and different kind of role today. It creates highly segmented, self-reinforcing groups where people only interact with those who share their views. This leads to the famous rift, la famosa grieta, where dialogue simply ceases and polarization becomes entrenched, making moderate politics almost impossible.
Let's delve into the Argentinian case study, focusing on Peronism's downfall and the rise of Milei. Because Tenenbaum attributes this outcome to two specific cultural and social factors that resonated deeply with the Argentinian voter, pushing them toward a truly radical option.
Okay. But before we go deeper, for the benefit of the learner who may not follow Argentine politics daily, we should probably give a brief definition of the force that Milei defeated.
Good point. Peronism.
Peronism. It's the long-standing populist political movement in Argentina founded by Juan Perón. It's known for combining labor rights and social justice with a deeply protectionist and often inflationary economic model.
Which often results in massive state spending and periodic financial crises.
Exactly. So defeating Peronism is a seismic event. And Tenenbaum argues that two specific factors drove this defeat.
Okay, what's factor one?
Factor one was the catastrophic PR failure of the pandemic, specifically the Fiesta de Olivos scandal.
Right, the party.
The party. This was the highly publicized event where the political elite, including the president, held parties during a harsh nationwide lockdown that demanded immense sacrifice and isolation from the average citizen. Tenenbaum was convinced the single event, which demonstrated such hypocrisy and indifference, condemned Kirchnerism, the left-wing faction of Peronism.
But the defining cultural motivation was factor two, which Tenenbaum brilliantly termed the no Sir Gil factor.
Yes, the deep desire of Argentinians not to be fooled or taken advantage of, no Sir Giles.
And the anger wasn't just about financial corruption.
No, although that was rampant and the tax money is already gone.
Right. It was the visceral cultural feeling of being personally wronged or mocked by a political class that lives by entirely different rules.
The humiliation. The humiliation of being the fool who followed the rules while the politicians partied. And the general contempt felt by the political class. That was what truly drove the vote for Milei. That psychological driver of humiliation was arguably more powerful than the financial pain itself.
Now, contrast that with the Bolivian case study, a completely different culture.
Completely. Bolivians, according to Tenenbaum, are described as loyal, stoic, and highly sacrificial. He used the vivid example of protesters who will walk 50 kilometers barefoot just to attend a manifestation.
50 kilometers. Barefoot.
It's an entirely different cultural response to political grievances than the Argentines' angry, immediate demand for dignity.
And he links this to their environment.
He does. Their culture is necessarily shaped by the harsh conditions of living at 3,000 to 4,000 meters high in the Andes, where life itself is physically demanding and patience is a necessity.
That's a profound contrast. It forces you to rethink our definition of voter engagement in Western democracies.
It does.
Yet, even in this stoic sacrificing culture, the shift away from the Evo Morales-Arce governments, which Tenenbaum classified as having dictatorial traits by the end, it was ultimately driven by the same classic factors: economic disaster and corruption.
The same, too. Specifically, a crippling lack of dollars and money made it impossible to conduct basic commerce. It just disrupted daily life to a breaking point.
And the result was a quiet, determined rejection of the ruling party.
That's it.
This analysis leads us naturally to the economic reality, which often provides the starkest contrast in Tenenbaum's observations. He suggests a new economic divide in Latin America, where political stability and financial success are often completely decoupled.
It's a very counterintuitive observation for any learner who assumes stability is paramount for markets.
Exactly. Let's look at the highly stable economies, the genuine success stories right now. Peru, for instance, is an incredible paradox. It truly flips the script.
It does. Despite constantly jailing presidents for corruption, the recent president caught up in the Rolex scandal is a prime example of high-level graft and political turnover. The economy is doing very, very well, Tenenbaum notes. It's outpacing many of its politically stable neighbors.
So why the success? Despite the chaos, where does that resilience come from?
Tenenbaum points to the institutional strength. Peru maintains stable, disciplined economic policies, boasts an independent central bank that fiercely protects the currency.
A key mechanism.
The key mechanism. It has a fortissimo or very strong local currency and enjoys constantly rising exports, particularly in mining.
So the independent central bank means politicians, no matter how chaotic, cannot just print money to solve short-term social or political debt.
And that protects the long-term value of the currency and reassures international investors. The institutional economic foundation is structurally divorced from the daily political drama.
Okay, another success story.
Paraguay, also doing very, very well. Tenenbaum highlighted their strong agricultural base and sensible financial management, and their economic stability is matched by political assertiveness. They recently announced that they will accept U.S. military air bases.
That is a massive geopolitical statement. It's aligning them strategically with the U.S., especially when you contrast it with the situation in Ecuador.
A powerful divergence. Ecuador's conservative figure, Novoa, actually tried to do something similar, establish U.S. air bases, but he lost a public referendum on the proposal.
So even among conservative voters, national sovereignty concerns can override economic stability goals.
It seems so. Speaking of stability, Panama and Ecuador, despite recent security issues in the latter, benefit immensely from using the U.S. dollar. That provides a profound measure of economic stability by importing the anti-inflationary discipline of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Panama, in particular, has historically been defined by its stability.
And Costa Rica as well.
Costa Rica also maintains a highly stable political and economic profile, relying primarily on high-value tourism and coffee exports to keep its economy afloat.
All right, now let's shift to the economies facing growing problems. This is perhaps more alarming because it includes countries traditionally seen as regional anchors of stability.
It suggests that internal rot is overcoming historical resilience. Uruguay, once famously called the Switzerland of South America, due to its financial stability and social consensus, is now struggling intensely.
What are the main challenges there?
They're severe. Increasing social aid dependency is a massive issue. Fewer people are participating in the formal workforce and more are relying on assistance, which strains the national budget and reduces productivity.
And compounding this is a severe and shocking increase in crime.
A huge increase. Tenenbaum suggests the current government risks putting the economy in check due to these mounting social costs and security breakdowns. When a stable society like Uruguay starts suffering security crises, it signals a regional infection.
Okay, what about the giant Brazil?
Brazil, due to its immense size and strength, is doing quite well, but not fabulously. Tenenbaum noted it is large and strong enough to experience normal upswings and downswings inherent to a massive economy currently resting somewhere in the middle.
So it can absorb shocks better.
Much better. While the stock market might fall and budget deficits might grow, the sheer scale of the economy allows it to absorb political volatility and policy missteps better than smaller neighbors. It's a resilient economic giant.
Finally, there's the highly concerning case of Colombia.
Very concerning. Colombia was once a massive exporter of food, flowers, and coal. It was one of the world's largest coal exporters, a pillar of their national income.
But President Petro made a highly ideological decision.
He did, to end coal and oil sales entirely, ostensibly to protect the planet.
And the direct consequence.
As analyzed by Tenenbaum, this policy is ruining the livelihoods of Colombians. It's dramatically impacting their primary export income and destabilizing their financial situation, causing him to lose immense popularity. It's a perfect example of ideological purity directly conflicting with economic reality.
So the stability of Brazil, and specifically the staying power of Lula, presents a fantastic case study in political survival amidst all this regional chaos.
It really does.
Why has Lula succeeded where other major left-wing figures like Chavez and Kirchner have faded? It can't just be the size of the economy.
No, it's his political style. It's skillful, non-ideological maneuvering and a lack of overt antagonism.
Let's break that down. First, he's perceived as moderate and open to dialogue.
He is. Tenenbaum highlighted the fact that he famously met with Trump, sending a signal that he is a pragmatist willing to negotiate with anyone regardless of their ideology.
Second, he skillfully appeals to Brazilian nationalism.
Very skillfully. Implementing strict reciprocity laws that put Brazil's interests first on the global stage, earning him respect from across the political spectrum.
Third, and this is crucial, the Brazilian public appears to be flexible regarding corruption.
Chuckles. That's a diplomatic way to put it. Tenenbaum noted that Lula was released from jail on a technicality which, in a country with a different political culture, might have ended his career.
But it didn't prevent his political return.
Not at all. The cultural response to political corruption in Brazil appears less punitive and more accepting of political maneuvering, a sort of political pragmatism, than the moral outrage we saw in Argentina or Peru.
And fourth, his political maneuvering is genius.
It is. He operates with a center-right vice president and, most importantly, lacks a decisive congressional majority.
Which forces him to be a deal maker.
Exactly. This structure forces him to position himself as a non-aggressive, unifying leader whose power is inherently shared and negotiated.
And crucially, Tenenbaum knows his speaking style is non-combative.
Right. Unlike fiery, polarizing figures like Christina Kirchner, Lula doesn't cause urticaria public irritation with his rhetoric. That makes him a far less polarizing figure who can always appeal to the center for legislative support.
This political positioning allows him a strong path forward.
It does. Tenenbaum believes Lula has a strong chance to win the next election, though this depends heavily on the strength of the right-wing opposition.
If they can find a unifying figure.
If the right can rally behind a truly unifying figure like the São Paulo governor and overcome Bolsonaro's potential interference, Lula could be seriously challenged.
But underlying all of this regional volatility and ideological maneuvering for Brazil and the entire region is the inescapable crime and security factors.
It's the ghost at the feast.
Crime fueled Bolsonaro's initial rise, his symbolic use of guns, his own stabbing incident. He spoke directly to the public's deep existential fear about security.
And the irony is that Bolsonaro failed to significantly reduce crime during his tenure.
So voters, feeling the security situation hadn't improved, chose a less polarizing option in the subsequent election.
And Tenenbaum's analysis links this directly to the broader breakdown of regional security. Montevideo and Santiago were once the safest cities in Latin America. They were synonymous with stability and predictability.
And today?
Today, Tenenbaum points out they are the opposite, especially Montevideo, where the rise in cartel violence and petty crime is shocking.
This highlights a fundamental breakdown in public security that transcends specific political ideologies and drives voter behavior across the board toward leaders who promise order, regardless of their other policies.
It becomes the only issue that matters.
Stepping back from Latin America, we have to now ask if this powerful swing to the right, fueled by a desire for order and disgust with the establishment, is mirrored elsewhere. Does the political pendulum in Europe swing similarly?
Well, Tenenbaum suggests the European pendulum is generally less extreme. It mostly swings between center-right and center-left, even in Germany, which has largely maintained stable centrist politics since the war.
But Italy is the interesting historical exception. A true left-wing government never really governed there.
No, largely due to Cold War pressures. Tenenbaum offered a fascinating historical anecdote about Pope Pius XII, illustrating the depth of anti-communist feeling that shaped their politics.
What was it?
Pius XII famously avoided excommunicating the Nazis during World War II, often citing the need for diplomatic caution. Yet, when faced with the possibility of a communist electoral victory in Italy in 1937, he immediately threatened excommunication for anyone who voted communist.
Wow, so he wouldn't excommunicate Nazis, but would for voting communists.
Exactly. It illustrates the profound existential fear of communism that profoundly shaped Italian politics, preventing the massive Communist Party from ever fully governing and locking the country into a rightward tilt.
However, while the classic left-right economic pendulum might be subdued, there is a definite significant movement occurring toward the ultra-right across Europe.
A huge one.
This is the shared synchronized wave that is connecting global politics, including Latin America. It's a shift toward ethno-nationalism and hard security.
And we see clear examples across the continent. Belgium is likely to see an ultra-right victory soon, which could potentially shake the federal structure of the country. Spain has the rising Vox Party, which is now on par with the traditional center-right Popular Party.
And Sweden.
Sweden's largest party is now the ultra-right, illustrating its dominance even if subsequent coalitions are formed to prevent them from governing directly. Poland was governed by the ultra-right until very recently, and that political force remains incredibly strong.
And critically, Tenenbaum noted that polls show the ultra-right winning an absolute majority in the UK if elections were held today.
Which demonstrates the depth of this populist, anti-establishment wave that is fundamentally changing the face of European governance.
The critical point here is the unifying theme, the transatlantic convergence. What unites these disparate movements in Chile, the UK, Sweden, and potentially the next Colombian government?
It's anti-immigrant sentiment and illegal immigration. Tenenbaum's analysis concludes that this is the singular emotional issue driving the synchronization of the rightward shift across the globe.
And we can circle back to the very first story we discussed, showing the immediate cause and effect of this sentiment in the U.S.
The killer of the MIT scientist. He was an immigrant who entered the U.S. via the visa lottery system.
And this specific tragedy had immediate and direct consequences, tying immigration policy directly to high-profile crime in the public mind.
It did. Trump immediately seized on it and canceled the visa lottery system entirely.
It shows how one high-profile incident can instantly translate into a fundamental shift in immigration policy, feeding the ultra-right narrative globally and confirming their fears about porous borders and uncontrolled entry.
This issue has become a political accelerator.
As we conclude this deep dive, we have to look towards the near future. Before the year ends, Tenenbaum offers two specific geopolitical predictions based on his observation of global players and their motivations.
First, Ukraine. Tenenbaum suggests that certain influential global actors believe Trump is eager to reach a framework agreement before Christmas.
A Christmas surprise.
It would be a major surprise, given the current stalemate, but it would only be a framework agreement, not a final peace treaty.
So, political maneuver.
Exactly. A political maneuver designed to change the dynamic before the next electoral cycle, rather than a comprehensive resolution of the conflict.
And second, the Venezuela question, the enduring conflict that constantly threatens to boil over. This remains a key focus for regional stability.
It does.
Will the U.S. invade?
Tenenbaum is convinced they will not. He believed the domestic political costs and the international ramifications are simply too high to justify an intervention of that scale.
The strategy instead is sustained economic suffocation and blockade.
Right. And Tenenbaum noted the recent tactical shift. The U.S. is now specifically targeting ports to tighten the financial screws and prevent trade, which is a significant escalation of the economic war against the regime.
So they're aiming for maximal internal pressure without military boots on the ground.
That seems to be the play.
Why then will Maduro not leave? What keeps him there?
Because he is surrounded by an estimated 100,000 security personnel in Sigüenza. The loyalists who know they have nowhere to go if he falls?
They're trapped with him.
Completely. Their only safe havens remaining are Cuba or Nicaragua. Maduro is essentially trapped, protecting his own ecosystem of survival and the security of his inner circle, whose lives depend on his power remaining intact.
The external messaging around this is also fascinating.
It is. Tenenbaum viewed the recent sudden appearance of Assad in Russian media, showing him living well in Russia despite his controversial status, as a signal.
A message directed specifically at Maduro.
A suggestion, perhaps, that a golden exile is possible and that they would not abandon him entirely, though his fate remains deeply tied to his security apparatus.
But the inevitable pressure point will arrive. Eventually, humanitarian concerns.
Venezuelans dying of hunger.
That will lead to intense internal and external pressure to lift the embargo. This is a political inevitability when sanctions become politically untenable due to widespread human suffering.
So the conflict will not end with an invasion, but with a painful, drawn-out concession forced by necessity to alleviate suffering and stabilize the flow of migration.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture, the most striking element of Tenenbaum's analysis is the rise of the ultra-right, synchronized across the globe and fueled by immigration concerns.
It suggests that while local issues still drive elections, the Nasser-Gil factor, local corruption, the core emotional driver fear of the other and concern over security is being synchronized globally.
Creating a new global political alignment that prioritizes control and order over traditional left-right economic debates.
It's a fundamental shift.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? The key takeaways are clear. First, economic stability, as seen in Peru and Paraguay, can exist entirely independently of political chaos, provided the foundational economic institutions like the independent central bank remain disciplined.
A huge lesson there.
Second, the psychological driver in Argentina, the desire not to be fooled, is sometimes more powerful than financial pain. It creates opportunities for radical candidates like Milei.
And third, the fragility of democracy in the face of rampant crime, visible from Brazil to the once safe streets of Montevideo, is one of the most immediate and dangerous threats to the region's stability. It often forces voters toward extreme solutions.
So here's your final provocative thought. Given this synchronized global movement toward the ultra-right, fueled by immigration fears and anxiety over technology, is this just a temporary correction or a sign that AI and massive geopolitical shifts are truly ending the classic political pendulum? Are we moving into new, globally synchronized cycles that defy the old left-right classification, where the axis is now simply order versus chaos? We encourage you to consider how your own country's economy and social stability stack up against the successful benchmarks laid out by Tenenbaum Peru's stable institutions or Paraguay's economic strength, and where your neighbors fit in. Thank you for diving deep with us.